Hello everybody, let's get straight to it. In this video, I will show you a specific business case of how business events in Dynamics 365 for finance and supply chain management now work with Microsoft Automate or former Flow. This scenario was inspired by participants of my IXUG Summit training session back in October of this year. And I will show this demonstration a bit differently. I will show you the end result first, and then I will show you all the setups that were in place in order to facilitate that scenario. So let's go to Dynamics 365 and let's open the list of all the activities. For people that work with case management in standard D365F&O know that cases can create multiple activities, or you can create activities on their own. And then these activities can have a different purpose, can be assigned to different employees, and then can be marked as closed or open. And let's take a closer look at all the activities that we have in here. So we see a first activity that has a purpose of called about past due invoices, and you see the customer is US 008, so that's association, so that activity is linked to that specific customer. Then we look at other activities, same customer 08, but it's the purpose of the activity is called set credit limit. Then we have another credit limit activity, but for the different customer, US 009 now. And then we have other activities for customer 005, as you can see on the right-hand side. Then there's another activity for customer 00011, but it's called call about past due invoices. And then we see last two activities that are for the same customer 0011, and first one is called set credit limit. And the second one is for the same customer, and the purpose is basically the same. The only thing is I added is word again. So that's basically our lay of the land at this point. We have multiple activities assigned to multiple customers and having different purposes. So what I will do now is I will go and navigate to the list of all the customers. I will open one of those customers, which is 0011. And you may remember that this specific customer has three activities assigned to them, the last three activities, called about past due invoices, set credit limit, and set credit limit again. So what I will do, I will open that customer in Dynamics 365 F&O. I will go into edit mode, and I will navigate to the field called credit limit under credit and collections, and I will set a credit limit of, let's say, 10,000. Once I do that, I will close the form to automatically save that change. So what I'm waiting for right now is for my alert, which is a change-based alert, to activate, which will take some time. So I'm going to pause the video and come back to it when it executes. So after waiting a minute or so, because my periodic job for change-based alerts were set up to run every minute, I can look in my top right corner and I see there's a notification, and that notification says that there is a field credit limit table has been changed. And what I will do next is I will come back to the list of my activities, and if you look at them right here, you see that none of them are closed, so all checkboxes on the right hand side are cleared, and I will refresh that view. And now you can see that the last two activities for the customer 0011, the one that have word credit in it, have been marked as closed. So activity number 380 was marked as closed, and activity marked 382 was marked as closed. You may notice that another activity for the same customer 11, but that has a different purpose, has not been closed. And you can check that other activities that had word credit limit, for example, this one or this one, but are for different customers, were not closed as well. So that's an example of how a change of credit limit for a specific customer triggered the update of activities for that customers, and that update was basically to close those activities that are for the credit limit setting for the customers that has been updated. So that was an automatic action before. That was a manual action before, where you had to go into the customer and set the credit limit, and then manually go and find the related activity and mark it as closed. So in this case, the action itself, update to a credit limit for the customer 0011, resulted in closure of all credit-related activities for that customer. So now let's take a look at how it was done. So the first thing I already mentioned was the setup of the change-based alert. and I will show you how it was set up right here. So I'm coming back to the list of all the customers here. I will click on Manage My Alerts under Options tab on the top here, and you see that I have a alert here that has an ID of 363. You see that alert is basically set up to notify me or not create an alert or create alert when the field credit limit in the table customer has been modified, has changed, right? So anytime the credit limit field in the customer's table is changed, that there is going to be an alert. Other things that you may need to may be interested in is seeing that I'm not sending the email, so it's set to no, but I'm sending it externally. So I check the checkbox, send externally to yes. So that's important because we don't want to just see that notification, or we just don't want to see an email based on that notification. We want to trigger a business event. So that will be the second step of the setup, is to configure a business event. I will go to the list of business event catalogs and check our endpoints. All right, and we see the active events. So we see that we have an alert or a business event. This rule was actually created automatically. I had to create a change-based alert, and then I had to create something in Microsoft Flow or now Automate, and that endpoint and the active events were populated for me automatically. You can see that in this form I cannot create new, I can only delete existing. All the new ones are created automatically based on your actions that you take in Microsoft Flow. So let's take a look at the third step and final step of setting up that flow in Microsoft Flow, or now it's called Power Automate or something like this. So let's go back and log into our Power Automate. Let's take a look at my flows here. And here's my flow that I created. It's called Activities. So I'm just going to go into the edit mode. And that's where I spend the most of the prep time for me to get that case to work, right? I'm not a technical person, so I don't have a lot of knowledge of coding and working with Flow, all the expressions, etc. So that's where the majority of my prep time was in to create this specific flow right here. So the first thing is I've added this when a business event occurs. So, and in this case, I need to specify the instance. So here's my Dynamics 365 instance. Then I have to specify the category of what specific business event had to occur for that flow to trigger. So in this case, it's going to be alerts. And when the alert is triggered, and it is for a change-based alert, in this case, for the legal entity USMF. I could have left that field blank. In this case, this would evaluate alerts in any legal entities, but in this case, it's only considering the alerts in USMF legal entity. So you may see here that my alert, my category is set to change-based alerts, but it doesn't specify a specific alert ID or alert type. And that's really not working for my purpose. I want to make sure that I execute this flow only when a specific alert has been created. So I don't want to run my flow for alerts in general, because I may have other change-based alerts that I set up in a system that I want to trigger my flow. But in this case, you can see that there is no way for me here to specify which alert ID should trigger my flow. And that's where I would have to go and define later on. All right, so once I have my alert, the next step, which was more technical than I expected, was to actually get the information and parse that information using that function that is called Parse JSON. So what it does is the alert triggers that flow, and the alert passes on some information to the flow that I will then later need to use for my flow. So in order to do that, I had to create the schema, and the schema was basically generated from a sample. So when the alert executed from the first time, I was able to go into the list of my business events here. So if you go and open the business events catalog and you find your change-based alerts business event, you can click on download schema, and that's basically the schema that I copied into my flow for the flow to understand what is expected to come. So here's your schema, it's open right here. It's basically passing on some information about the alert itself, and then I was able to use that schema and let's go back to our flow to populate it right here. So for the Parse JSON to be able to differentiate different data fields that were passed on to it from the alert. So I use that function first. All right, so now we have some information about the alert. And now I need to use that information to make a decision, should I run my flow or should I not run my flow? So that's where this condition comes into play. So here's my condition. I was able to use rule ID that was parsed by JSON in the previous step, right? So when alert is generated, it has an alert ID, it has information about the customer, it has some sort of message, etc. So I was able to use the rule ID, and I said only run my flow when rule ID equals to 0000363. And you may remember that my alert for the credit limit change inside Dynamics 365 had an ID, had the same ID. So I'm basically saying that I will run my flow only when that credit limit alert has been activated. In other cases, for other change-based alerts, I will not, that validation would return false, and you can see that if no, I really have no action, so nothing will happen in that flow. Only when that alert is for the credit limit change, I will run the branch on the left-hand side. All right, the next three steps you see here are about getting that customer ID. The reason why it was a bit more complicated is that the customer ID was not in a specific field, but it was rather, if I were to show you how it was done right here, let me just show you the flow runs here. So I will go back here. I will look at all the history of it being run. I will select the step right here. And it will show me the inputs and outputs for last run this alert has run. Last time this alert has run. And you can see here, this is the input that I'm getting from my alert. And you can see that the customer account right here is actually embedded inside, which is something called message details. So it's not a separate field that has been passed on, because the assumption is that not all the alerts will have a customer ID, but all the alerts will have a message details. And I was fortunate enough to see that standard schema basically passing on information about the customer account. But you can see here, it's actually inside the message. It also has a name of the customer, alert test on the right-hand side. It has the customer account right in the middle, and then it has some word view in the middle, at the beginning. So I needed some way to extract only the customer ID from that flow, from that message. And as you understand, the challenge here was that the customer ID may have different lengths. Sometimes it can be 6 characters, sometimes it can be 5, 8, etc. So I could not hard code the length of that message or that ID. So I had to use functions to basically extract it, right? So that's basically what I used here, all these 3 functions. I don't want to go into details, but basically idea was to make sure that I'm getting the correct and full customer ID extracted from that alert message. So all those 3 functions, and I can share with you that flow if you want to. All those 3 functions were actually to get me the customer ID that then I will use later on. All right, now, once we have the customer ID extracted, we can move on to the next step. And the next step was basically to show all the records from Dynamics 365 F&O data entity. I think the record was, the function was called get all records or get records for FinOps, right? So this is an action right here. If I expand it, there are a few things that we need to understand here. First of all, the name of the entity right here. This is a custom legal entity. I had to develop a custom legal entity for my case activities because there were none of standard entities available out of box. So I had to work with the developer to come up with 2 entities, and I will explain why 2. The first legal entity, which you will see here, will have a link to a customer account. This entity had a reference to association. So it was created not to update the records in F&O, but rather get the records in F&O. So that's a flat entity that has a customer, it has an activity ID, it has activity purpose, but it also has association on the customer side that we can use. So that's an important piece. This legal entity was just to get the records and get the list of all the activity IDs that I will need to update. And the second legal entity was actually a different one, still a custom one, that was created to update these records with activity IDs that identified. So the purpose of this step is just to get a list of all the activity IDs that are matching a certain condition. And what is that condition? So we can see it right up here, this statement right here. So I think we have to kind of look at it one by one. So the first condition is that the data area ID is equal to USMF. So I'm just saying that let's make sure to only return the records of activities that are in USMF legal entity. Pretty basic. The second one was a bit more complicated here, but it basically saying that the purpose should contain word credit, because there may be multiple activities that have different purposes, but I will only want to return the activity that has word credit in its purpose. And then the last activity, which was the most important one, I think, from this perspective, is to make sure that the customer account equals to output of the previous step. And that previous step was the customer ID, which is the step right here. So that's why I needed to make sure that if the credit limit was modified for customer 1 to 3, I would like to return all the activities for the customer 1 to 3 only. And on top of that, I would like to make sure that this list of activities for customer 1 to 3 is filtered to make sure there is a word credit in the purpose. So I'm making sure that I filtering the list of all the activities that currently exist in the system to filter it on specific customer ID. And then on top of that, making sure that there is a word credit in its purpose. And of course, they should be all in the company USMF. So that's a filter that was to create and make sure that only the correct activities will get updated. And once I have that list of all the activities, the next step is this kind of loop. I think a lot of people that are experienced with Flow are talking about it. So it's a fairly, I think the way I kind of understand it's like a repeat function to say, all right, maybe there are 2 or 3 different activities for the same customer that have word credit in it. So, I want to make sure that I'm going to run through them all, and I'm going to do certain actions to all the activities that were identified in the previous step. So this is what I think this kind of apply to each does. So what exactly do I want to do with those activities? Well, I would like to update records. I would like to update those activities. Remember, because I know that there's a credit limit was set for these customers, so I would like to close those activities that have word credit and are for that customers to make sure that you don't have to do it manually. That's the whole purpose of this exercise, I guess. So I'm using this FinOps update record action, and what we need to look at here, it's same environment, but there's another data entity which is called Nextone activity. So that's a second custom data entity, but this data entity can be used to update records. The previous one was because it was a compounded or composite data entity. That entity you could not use to update records. This one is a simple data entity that has all the fields from SMM activities table, so I can use this data entity to update my records. All right, now the first thing you need to kind of make sure here is which records are to be updated, and that's where you're specifying the inputs from the previous step, which is the step right here, find activities that match customer ID. So the object ID field, which is right here, was not too intuitive to me. Again, I'm not working with Flow, so I kind of trying to understand what exactly did system expect me to enter here, but kind of through a trial error came to a conclusion that it expected me to tell which company, which legal entity it is for, and which activity ID would you like to update. So all those 2 inputs, the company and activity, are dynamic inputs from the previous step. You can see these steps is called find activities that match customer ID and are credit related. So from this step right here. So I was basically saying, that previous step got a company ID and the activity number, so use those ones, and those are the records that you need to update. Then there's another mandatory field was called activity number. Well, it's kind of repetitive, but I had to enter again the same dynamic input, which was the activity number from the previous step. So now the system is all set. All right, I know now which records you would like to update. You would like to update the records that were identified in the previous step, and we already know how the previous step was set up. Now, the last piece to that puzzle would be to say, all right, now I know which activities you would like to update, but now you will have to tell me which changes would you like to happen. And if I scroll all the way down right here, I think that can go away. That was just me testing right here the resources. But if you look closer, like here, I'm saying that the closed property for these activities would have to be set to yes. And that's how my activities in this list right here were closed. Only the last two activities. Why? Because they were for the right customer, 0011, and they had word credit in it. So that's how I made the whole event happen, which I know is a lot of steps, and it's a bit maybe technical, but let's just summarize here. So I think what we did here is we set up a change-based alert that was triggered by the update of the credit limit field. That alert was triggered, and it triggered the business event. That business event triggered a workflow which then identified all the activities that would need to be updated, and then updated those activities by marking close checkbox on. So that is all I wanted to show you during today's demo. I hope you find it useful for you. Again, I would be more than glad to share the flow itself with people that are interested, share how the custom data entities for activities were created. And as I said, thank you very much for people who attended my session at AXUG Summit this October in Orlando, because during my session for the case management, that the inspiration for this video actually came about. So thank you very much. Until the next time.